We live in a new world, a world that is changing faster than we ever thought possible. A world where we can either adapt or get left behind. It's not about the swiftness of the change, but the greatness of it. Social, cultural, political, but perhaps most of all, professional. Businesses are evolving in different ways, and it's opening up countless new doors for commerce. And in this moment of rapid transition, one thing remains constant. For more than a century, we have served as one of the longest and most vibrant American chambers in Asia. Time and again, we have recognized and confirmed our commitment to trade and commerce and the good it does to our members. By bringing leaders together, by being a voice of business, by making the right connections, and by taking action on the things that matter. This is what AmCham was built for. We are here to serve the interests of Filipino and American businesses by being an avenue for valuable knowledge, effective networking, proactive advocacy, and continued affiliation, all of which contribute to the constant development of the economy. This new and shifting world is full of possibilities. But for us, it comes with a great responsibility. We are AmCham, gathering information to share and discuss the things that drive us forward, connecting leaders, governments, and businesses, taking action on commercial, economic, and even global issues, contributing to the growth of the economy that would strengthen the relationship between its members. For commerce, for progress, and most of all, for country. AmCham Philippines.
Yeah, Eb, Steve, and heartfelt hello and welcome from sunny Hong Kong to everyone who's attending. It is a tremendous privilege to be here. I have enjoyed speaking live at AmCham in Manila, and Eb and Steve and the team have been the most gracious hosts I could think of, and I jumped at the opportunity when Steve suggested that we could do something together again. So it's a pleasure to be here, and thank you everyone for taking the time out of your busy days or evenings if you're attending from overseas and from Americas to tune in and learn and share. The topic of our discussion today is this ability to conduct virtual security assessments. I'll run you through a few slides that will give you a sense of how that could work, or for those of you who have been doing these things already, how you could think about improving your capabilities. And so let me see if I can move on to the next slide. Before we proceed, right, it's very important to acknowledge how our lives have already been changed by all sorts of different events, and not just COVID, but we have all sorts of things happening around us, which sometimes we pay a lot of attention to, and sometimes we just don't have the bandwidth. And so I'm always very pleased to see how humor and just being able to take our focus away from the nitty-gritty, very difficult things that beset us every day, how humor helps us move forward. And I wish for everyone attending today that we start feeling some sense of normalcy and start seeing each other in person, because I know, especially for the crowd in the Philippines, this is such an important factor of your interaction. So I'm very sad that I'm not with you in person, but we're trying to make do with technology. So Steve already made an introduction, and thank you for that. I will not dwell on it. I can just remind you that nobody in our field, in the field of asset protection and risk management, is a person who says that they've learned it all. Every time I speak to somebody, every time I teach, every time I have to do one-on-one coaching, I always learn something new. So I also ask of you to keep an open mind, and please try to draw what would be useful for you and your organization from this conversation. So I'll run through a few of these points. I have now conducted, if I had to think about, in general, from 2000 on to now, in the last 20 years, multiple hundreds of virtual security assessments. That's in addition to conducting on-site assessments. And of course, the typical response from any security practitioner is to attend in person, be there at the site. But here we are, restricted in many ways in our travels by the pandemic, and we have to find alternative ways, innovative ways of doing our work and doing it well. So I'll share with you these points that you can take home and work with your teams if you do need to assess facilities where you're not present, where you otherwise would have to travel but have no ability to, that you can still look at them from a security perspective and understand what challenges exist at those facilities and how to overcome them. But before we go anywhere, it's always a great thing to, because we have technology, to be able to share with you this photo. I want you to remember, just look at this photo in general. And it's almost like trying to solve a puzzle or trying to find a hidden object. This photo has a lot of telltale signs of security controls. And this is just the main entrance of the facility. So I want you to just try to pick up on anything that stands out to you about security of this place, right? We will get back to this, and I will try to dissect for you what things can stand out, but just take a look at this facade for just a second and try to gather your thoughts. And we'll get back to it later on as I proceed. So, of course, the natural challenge to me when I say that I can conduct virtual security assessments is this dilemma of, well, if we know how to conduct on-site security assessments, how do we forego this in-person interaction? How do we forego the ability to touch and feel various parts of a facility and various controls and experience them for ourselves? I will specifically highlight the walkthrough portion of an on-site assessment and share with you how there could be ways in which you can actually conduct a lot of that without having to be on site. There are luckily today so many tools and measures and also relationships which are important on site that we can call it, that we can rely upon to create a near, a very close experience to what you would experience on site. So this is the main challenge, okay? I kid you not, this is typically what folks I work with ask me. And they say, Ilya, you're not able to attend our facility in person, so how would you be able to understand how it operates? Well, if we break out the portion of the walkthrough of the facility, right? Because all other parts, and I will again repeat that a little bit later, all other parts of the assessment are primarily and can be conducted without ever setting foot on site, okay? But the walkthrough is where the main challenge is. So if we break it out, you can see that there are probably about 5 parts, 5 major domains of the walkthrough. You can look at the environment, meaning that it's not just the building itself, but surrounding area, the property lines, and you can see the photo. I'm sorry, it's a bit, possibly a bit too small, but it's a typical office park, if you will, with a nice building, fairly sprawling, and has parking lots, and then it abuts a major thoroughfare. I mean, you don't have to go far to relate to this environment if you simply think about how Manila is laid out. Okay, you have the EDSA, you have multiple other major thoroughfares that are adjacent to large chunks, large districts of the city, right? So no different from that perspective. Well, how can we look at it today, right? I just completed an assessment literally within the last 12 hours, and much of that information can be derived from a few sources, such as architectural site plans. You could look at Google Earth in most cases, not in all cases, but in most cases. And you can always rely on different types of technologies, be it video surveillance or individuals on site who can send video feeds to you. Some of the assessments can be conducted by simply having a live stream. Okay, and I know that that's a good possibility as well. We also talk about experience, right? So obviously, if I'm not at the facility, right, I'm not able to kind of go through different processes. Like, for example, come through the main entrance and then there's a security post. I'm not able myself to observe how that security post would operate. However, there are ways of, through interviews and also, again, through use of technology to observe how circulation moves, how people move through different parts of the facility, and the site, how vehicle circulation works without having to physically be there. And I'll give you some examples of how that worked out for me for a variety of assessments. The other thing that you should be aware of, and this is the most important piece of any assessment, be it on-site or virtual, because of how security works, everything fails if the behaviors on site of the individuals that belong to this office complex or an industrial facility, whatever that may be, it's the behaviors that drive everything else. You could saturate the facility with a lot of security controls, but if the behaviors and awareness of people is not there, unfortunately, controls will be circumvented eventually, and very little will work from a security standpoint. So to identify and understand behaviors, right, that also I have learned can be done through interviews, through interaction with senior leadership, by speaking with people who are in charge of, let's say, security locally, people who are responsible for writing policies and procedures for the organization. But actually, and I'm sure that those of you who have been in the field for a long time, you can have a single conversation and ask a few questions. And for example, something like, do you have policies and procedures? If the answer is no, then it is very likely that the behaviors on site will not be consistent in terms of security. Because without having policies and procedures, you don't have the foundations to be able to communicate consistently, but also frequently, what are the requirements from a security standpoint. So if we don't start with the policies and procedures, unfortunately, much else is not possible to deliver in a secure manner. Of course, there's also a question of technology. Today, it is very possible to look at how technology is deployed around the facility without setting foot on site. For example, there is remote connectivity that can be done to interrogate systems. And if you're looking at, for example, at video surveillance, you really don't need to be on site. You just need to have the ability to review video footage, both in the morning, during the afternoon hours, and then at night, to see how video surveillance performs. And then conduct interviews to understand a little bit more about how it's being used, how video surveillance is prioritized. And so that goes for many other systems. Another point here is maintenance. Now, I'll show you, I mean, you can see the photo right under that, that tagline. It's really, in my experience, not very difficult to identify how the facility is maintained. And it starts really with things that have nothing to do with security, right? Sometimes you look at the overall, let's say if a facility has some exterior grounds, you look at how landscaping is done. Is it in good condition? Do you see that everything is green? Or do you see, and I've seen this at some sites in Manila, where I get a photo and it's a very prominent facility, but let's say a portion of that facility or a portion of exterior grounds is filled with garbage, is filled with some, construction materials and what have you. And it's very unsightly, and it's been there for a long, long time. It has nothing to do with ongoing construction, for example, right? So those things can be actually collected through a lot of video and photographic evidence without having to be on site. And then the same goes for understanding how security technologies and physical security controls are installed, right? It's not a problem to look at a photo and understand whether a lock is in good condition. It's not an issue to take a look at how cabling is run to a surveillance camera. And if it's visible, if it's exposed and it's dangling, that's one of the telltale signs. And again, not something that requires presence on site. Of course, you probably will not be able to see every single one of the field devices or field controls, but to collect sufficient amount of information by sampling, right, is very possible and doable. And like I said, if much of your sample basically tells you a negative story, let's say broken windows, poorly maintained doors and windows, poorly maintained site grounds, poorly installed systems and security technologies, that probably does not require further scrutiny, okay? So let's move through. And here are the main differences between what you would do on site and what you can do virtually. So here, of course, and the folks in Manila and other places could actually understand it much better than I do. The lack of human contact. And so, yes, this is one of the challenges for conducting virtual assessments, is that unless you've built a certain sense of rapport with local representatives, right, it's very difficult to actually conduct the assessment and have them on your side, because typically people assume that you're trying to dig through things and add to their budget by pointing out some deficiencies. However, building common ground before the assessment is pretty much what's required in order to deliver, be it a virtual assessment or an on-site assessment. So that lack of human contact can be easily overcome by having built strong relationships with your local contacts. The best part about it is that you don't incur any travel costs or don't incur any travel logistical challenges. A friend of mine recently traveled around Asia, in a few countries. In every country, there was a gap of quarantine that he had to stay in, right? So a week was lost in one country, 2 weeks were lost in another. And so, of course, it becomes not only costly from the travel perspective, and of course, we all know that airfares have gone up, and sometimes the logistics, if you're traveling to multiple locations, are a little bit more challenging to organize, but also the time lost is a significant issue. And so virtual assessment pretty much eliminates that. Now, there are two parts here that are very important. So focusing on consistency and quality of visual materials. Of course, like I said, how would I be able to understand the facility if I have never seen it, right? So seeing is very important. How do you do that? You ask the local team to collect photographic evidence and collect video footage for you to be able to see the facility. There's also connectivity opportunities to look at existing video surveillance and observe the facility in that from that perspective. And last but not least, I cannot say that it works in all instances for all geographic locations, but Google Earth has been quite useful. You can see a lot of terrain. You can understand the adjacencies. You can understand larger areas. And I have a slide later on to show you how that could work. And the one challenge is that any practitioner who tries to perform a virtual security assessment needs to have a broader knowledge of security, security technology, security operations, and also having to have had some extensive field experience, because we don't learn by sitting in a room. We all have to have had some field experience, to go out to sites and see what typically works, what are the telltale signs. This is what I tried to convey to you in my earlier slide. So this need for better understanding of security tech, operations, physical security controls like doors, walls, windows, and things like that, locking hardware. I think those are some of the challenges that some practitioners might have. For example, if I throw some names at you, right, would you be able to tell me right away whether it's you have some positive understanding of that name or not? I'm not quizzing you, but just take those notes down. One is Verkada. What have you heard about that brand? What do you understand about it? Have you heard recent news? The second one is Pelco. Have you heard anything about that brand? Third is, let's say, Brivo, right? Is it something that rings a bell or you know nothing about it? Okay, Gallagher, right? And so if you, let's say, haven't built that awareness of how those technologies perform, what they do for clients, and what are some of the challenges and drawbacks in those technologies, then of course there might be an issue with you being able to assess the facility, whether on site or virtually, because you simply don't have that skill set. And so building that knowledge base is very important. Like I said, very quickly, the benefits are very simple. Very efficient relative to time and cost. Typical assessments that I conduct, let's say I completed an educational campus assessment just recently. It's a fairly large campus with more than, I think, 1,500 people there. Probably took about 10 to 12 hours altogether between interviews, report preparation, and analysis of local conditions, collecting information on various threats, past incident history. So all of that could be done in a matter of about 10 to 12 hours. Sometimes it could be more efficient if you already have some past information about that facility. In this case, it was a new assessment for me. No travel. Okay, so I sit in Hong Kong. most of my work today in the last few weeks has been in the United States. Why? And some people are just kind of baffled. They're like, what are you doing? Aren't there enough practitioners in the States to be able to do this in person? Well, those practitioners are also sitting in their apartments, not able to attend to certain facilities just because of sometimes COVID restrictions. Sometimes the facility has a policy that they cannot let you on site, okay? But yet you still have to understand what security controls exist. And in my case, it's just very useful to be able to know the process and understand how to conduct it virtually. And I have been leveraging multiple technologies to understand better the facility's terrain, the building structures. Sometimes practitioners are benefited by just simply understanding how to read architectural drawings and security implementation drawings, like as-built, for example. And you can pick up a lot of information about how the building is constructed from those from those documents. So please don't be concerned that there's lack of information or lack of technologies to assist you. You just need to know where to look. And so, believe it or not, in my personal experience, and like I said, I've done both virtual and on-site assessments for a number of years. It actually helped me when I've conducted and continue to conduct virtual assessments to build more skills, to understand more. Because every time I have to look at a facility virtually and interact with individuals, and imagine like you only see upper portion of my torso, you see my shoulder line, you see my face, right? So I had to develop some ways to change my body language even when I have to connect with people on Zoom, right? So that at least they could stay engaged a little bit longer, right? And so that they could feel that I come across as meaning well, and I'm trying to help them and basically create positive attitude, okay? So, you know, there is a significant difference in how you would do that, whether if you're conducting on-site and in-person communication, and when you're a bit restricted with the boundaries of your video camera. So, so those skills I've also been building. I've also been doing a ton of research on just generally security controls and products and technologies. What are some of the recent developments? Where are some of the brands going, or some of the technology? How is it converging? Are there, let's say, more developments in access control versus video surveillance or intrusion detection, or, for example, let's say barrier systems, right? So I would have to be aware of those changes in our industry, and also be very geographically minded, because I had a project not so long ago, and it was in Nepal, right? When we brought up a few brands, like, for example, Axis, right? It's a very important video surveillance brand, very high quality, works very well when implemented at facilities. However, there is a significant tax that's levied on arrival and sales of this brand in Nepal, right? And sometimes for project reasons, it's just not possible to purchase something of this sort. So you have to understand that before you recommend those technologies. And a lot of my clients have asked specifically for products that are more geographically accessible and can be easily obtained, and again, within economic constraints of each project. So I also believe that virtual assessments can be very useful for future cross-functional collaboration. I mean, look at what we're doing now. We have people in the roster of attendees that are not just security practitioners. Some people are from nonprofits, and some people do risk management more from a quantitative and qualitative and standards and compliance perspective, right? And some other folks maybe are in retail. Some folks have a variety of different functions other than security, is what I'm trying to say. And as you are restricted in your ability to arrive at the site and be the security practitioner there, you actually can start building those relationships virtually and get more collaborative with local representatives. Teach them to be your eyes and ears. And I think that's worked for me 20 years ago, and it continues to work for me today. So the methodology is not really different from your typical on-site assessment, right? You would certainly need to understand the facility type. How large is it, for example? I mean, are we looking at a city or are we looking at a small office? So that drives the number of hours you would have to dedicate to actually perform an assessment, and what types of information you would have to collect. I've had projects that used drones, for example, where we did not have physical access to a site, right? But we did have local contacts that could facilitate drone operations. Again, a lot of restrictions in terms of where you could fly, right? But it is not impossible. I know that some of the facilities in Manila have even done commercial videos for their facilities using drones recently. And so that's an available technology as well. Certainly, we also have to be mindful of the scope of the this assignment, whatever virtual assessment you're going to be conducting, because sometimes a client and even yourself, you have a specific set of objectives, and sometimes they revolve around certain assets. It could be people, it could be perhaps valuable piece of technology, or some machinery, or just simply a physical structure of a building. Okay, so you have to be very careful scoping out what it is that you're going to be reviewing, and then focusing collection of information on that. I mean, pretty much the rest of these steps are fairly understandable. I already covered local contact and the importance of collaboration with them. Information and analysis is all encompassing in terms of what you collect from your client, but also what kind of research you have to do, right? So for example, it's not difficult to pick up a phone and maybe connect with the local law enforcement. Or if you don't have that type of access, figure out alternative ways of seeking information about past incident history. In some jurisdictions, that information is readily available online. And in some, you need to make calls, you need to have a sufficient network of resources, which is another benefit, because then that expands your local resource network. The rest of the stuff is fairly self-explanatory. You would do the same type of reporting, you would do the same type of follow-up, and perhaps ongoing monitoring of changing conditions. So I'll only give you an example of one of these projects. So let's talk about an industrial facility in Hong Kong. Okay, so this facility needed to be compliant with the Maritime Security Code. And this facility was in the process of it was already operational from our perspective, and at the same time, it was still adding some features and some functions. The team at the facility were very, very good, because they immediately understood that there's not a lot of work that can be done on site, so we had to do a lot of work virtually, and they provided immediately a trove of documentation, very clearly labeled, very well organized, to share with us about basically how the site is positioned, its site planning, its structural integrity, and how it's designed from a compartmentalization and functional perspective. Where is pedestrian circulation? Where is vehicular circulation? So all of that information came to us virtually. We had no presence on site. And so some of the challenges arose when they started discussing how they were going to implement some security technologies. When we started asking them questions about, well, who's responsible for the project, this is where things became difficult, because they really didn't understand how to deal with contractors in security, how to look at product, how to evaluate it. And very, very soon we understood that they just didn't have the capability to implement something that would serve them well. and that would produce a good return on investment. So we saw a gap in their ability to interact with contractors and obtain good quality security technologies. And this was all done virtually in our discussions, and we were able to steer them in the right direction. But in addition, there's been multiple projects in different countries that I could go on into, but unfortunately we don't have a whole lot of time. And I'm happy to engage with any of you later on if you feel like you wanted to ask additional questions. So only 3 key factors will improve your ability to conduct assessments virtually. Number 1, relationships. So you have to have built existing relationships with local sources, okay? Of course, it's best if, and for those companies that have multiple facilities across either the Philippines or elsewhere, that's a given, right? Because you have to interact with those people to solve problems together and so on. So, but having those local contacts and sources that can devote enough time to work with you is super important. Secondly, your own ability and the ability of those locally to organize information and organize your schedule and have certain milestones on your schedule about how you're going to complete the assessment are also very important. For example, I recently received a set of photographs, there's like 100 of them, and a few videos, and none of them are labeled. So I'm looking at them, I'm like, I don't know what I'm looking at. Can you please tell me what's what at your facility? I probably can make sense of it, but if those things are not labeled by people at the site, it's going to be very challenging and time-consuming for me to be able to figure that out myself. So those are some of the simple things you could think about. And of course, like I said before, knowledge. Knowledge is super important. We have to build our capability, understand product, understand local and regional and geopolitical trends, understand how operations work, who are good providers of different security services and technologies locally and also in general. So those 3 are building our capability. So very briefly, your assessment is going to have 3 core areas. One is the middle here: physical, operational, technology, and incident management. You would do pretty much the same with your on-site assessment, but those are the core features. And then you're basically moving both outside of the facility, if the facility is what you're assessing, and then you're moving inside the facility. So you would need to understand site planning, how to read site drawings, how to do more research using online technologies. And you also will need to collect enough information to understand how is facility compartmentalized functionally? What functional spaces exist? The corridors, workshops, classrooms if it's an educational facility, and so on. Operations itself is split into 2 parts. Of course, there's security side. So security of personnel, documentation, training, awareness, all of that is part of the security block. But there's also, and very importantly, day-to-day operations, right? How does the facility function outside of security, right? When are the peak hours of people coming and going? When are deliveries brought in? When are certain special events held, right? And basically, that part also needs to be understood in addition to your security operations. And this is how we collect information. So by photos, I also mean that it could be video content, whichever way. You could gather photographic evidence and video evidence, both for outside of the facility, inside, and then existing security. My typical comment to people I'm working with virtually is, imagine you're giving me a tour of the site, okay? Start at the perimeter, at the outer perimeter of the property and walk me in, okay? And then I guide them to tell me and label the photos in the same manner, right? Documentation, the same way. If you have the ability to read drawings, beautiful. And by the way, drawings from different trades. There is a difference from an electrical set to the reflected ceiling set to the furniture plan. and various other types of drawings. You should be selective about what you would need to look at in order to understand the drawings properly. So, as we go back to our photo with which I started, let me just run you through how I can tell by looking at the facade of this building where my client is lacking some protection. And I marked everything with arrows. So I'm not trying to play a puzzle with you. You will understand also. The security officer is looking at his cell phone. Now, very clearly it could be a message from his boss who says, oh yeah, you must change post. I get that. I'm not going to make an assumption. But in many cases, more often than not, security officers play on their phone more than they should, or they shouldn't do that at all, particularly if they're on post. The second thing to the right of the security officer is a punch code lock. Those locks can be circumvented within less than a minute, and the facility then is exposed. I'm also looking on the left of the security officer at unprotected door hinges. I can remove a pin from that door hinge and make my way into the facility if I'm intent on doing so. In the photo in the upper right side of the slide, the lighting unit on the left of that photo it does not give me confidence that lighting around the facility is good. Okay, the sign in the window in the above the door of the facility gives me some idea of that this facility has religious context. This is a Jewish facility. Okay, so what do I need to look at in terms of threats for Jewish facilities in that jurisdiction, in that location, right? And on top of that, the entire part above the door is made primarily of glass. And the facility's facade has lots of windows. And if my threats include vehicle bombs or any sort of improvised explosive devices, right, I'm dealing with a lot of flying glass and debris that may injure a lot of people. Then at the lower photo on the right side, there are two cameras, and it tells me that either the facility doesn't have a good relationship with an integrator who's not advising them properly, because one camera is very old on the left, and another camera is relatively newer, but still needs further scrutiny. And why are they of different types? There's no consistency in the type of video surveillance technology and hardware that is being procured. So that tells me that I need to investigate and understand a little bit better what to ask my contacts. Now, this is just the facade of the building. Okay, I can spend more time looking around, and of course I'll pick up far more information by going inside the building and looking at the photos, but those are just the points in that small photo that you can pick up on. I know we're running out of time, but I want to suggest to you your own exercise. Everyone who's from Manila or who's traveled to Manila understands what we're looking at. This is Bonifacio Global City. If I were to tell you, okay, we need to conduct an assessment, on a virtual assessment of Bonifacio Global City, where would you start? Now, it's a hypothetical question. I'm not asking you to provide answers to me, but the most important part that a lot of practitioners completely forget about it, or they just don't bring it into their assessments, is the question of what are the mission critical assets? What are we protecting? Okay, and if somebody says, well, just go and conduct a security assessment. Well, what am I assessing from a perspective of protection, right? If I don't know what assets need to be protected, then I'm sorry, I won't be able to do anything, no matter the size of the facility. In this case, somebody could say to me, well, there is a hospital in Bonifacio. I need you to take a look at the surrounding area and tell me how to protect that facility in the surrounding area better in order to facilitate proper arrival of emergency vehicles, proper delivery of, let's say, persons to that facility, and good circulation in and around, right? What would I be looking at? Where is that hospital located, right? So I would be looking at the surrounding area, and you can easily then take a look at areas of Bonifacio that are very much connected. Let's say there are intersections that, if traffic there is blocked, and we all know how traffic works in Manila, may cause some concerns, right? So please, by looking at this photo, don't forget that you're going to be presented with this assignment or something else, small, large, doesn't matter. If you have not established what are you trying to protect, you won't be able to give your clients any answers. I wish we could spend far more time, but we're running out of time. I wish for you not to be the cat in the Zoom call. We're all tired of tech, using Zoom or other communication technologies. Stay strong. I wish for you to keep building your relationships and rely on those relationships to be resilient. And I wish for you to stay healthy. I know that everybody's going through challenges here and there. Thank you very much for your attention. And now, unfortunately, we don't have a whole lot of time, Steve. I don't have to run, but I'm happy to take questions.
Okay, that's great. Thanks so much, Ilya, for your really eye-opening and mind-opening presentation.